Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stories of Hope. I'm here today with Bethany, and she's going to share a little bit of her story and how she's found hope and continued to stay strong in the midst of dealing with a disability. And so I'm really excited for you to get to hear some of her story and the ways that God has worked in her life and brought her to where she is today. I got to meet her a few years ago, back when we were high schoolers, at Asbury at a camp, and it was really cool just to get to see how God has worked in her life from when she was young all the way through now, and then getting to see her growing in college and meeting her, just her encouragement and her heart for God and for people is just really encouraging to me, and I'm excited for you to get to hear a little bit more about her and the ways that God has worked in her life. So, Bethany, can you share a little bit about your life story and how you've what your journey's been like?
Yes, thank you so much, Heather, for having me. It was a privilege to be here. I'm super grateful. So I think an important part of my story to share comes from the very beginning. So I have a disability called Cerebral Palsy, and I was born 14 weeks premature on May 9th, and my mom's due date was on August 13th. So I was in the hospital for 3 months before I came home. And so cerebral palsy doesn't get any worse. And I have a very mild form. I've met people who have very severe cases and who have trouble walking at all. I walk with a walker on a regular basis, and then sometimes if we're going for longer distances, I'll use a power chair. But overall, I do really well with getting around and different things. And so one part of my story that I think has really impacted my life is when I was 11 days old. So I was on life support 100%, and my lungs looked like Swiss cheese when I was born because they were so underdeveloped. And so when I was 11 days old, my parents came into my hospital room, and I was surrounded by doctors. And they said, we tried to call you, but we couldn't get you. And this was like in the 90s, so they didn't have cell phones back then. And so they were shocked when they walked in. They didn't know what was going on. And they said, there's nothing more we can do for her. I weighed 1.5 pounds when I was born, so I was super, super tiny. And my mom at that point called my grandma, and she said, will you please call Pastor John, who was our pastor at the time? And she said, we want to get her baptized before she dies. And so our pastor came down to the hospital, and he baptized me. And it was really a miracle because within an hour, I was breathing on my own a little bit, and I wasn't off life support completely for a while, but to even take breaths on my own a little bit, like that's huge because, like I said, I was on 100% before, and so that was really huge. And then growing up, my parents raised me to try everything and to be really outgoing and really active and to not let my disability stop me. And so I showed 4-H when I was growing up, from the time that I was 5 until I was 18, and I would walk with holding a rope, and I would walk with the animal and they would walk beside my walker. And so that was really interesting to work through that. And there have been a lot of instances like that where, you know, I've just decided that I'm not going to let anything stop me, because God is so good and He provides. And, I know that I was put on this earth for a reason, and I'm going to do whatever I can to live this life.
It's pretty incredible to see that how God has saved you and then brought you all the way to where you are now, from that little baby all the way up to today. So yeah. So what is one thing that has been really challenging, and how have you overcome that challenge?
I would say one thing that has been really challenging has been reconciling my disability and my calling. And I would definitely say that God has really worked in me and through me as He's helped me to do that. On October 28th, 2012, I was called to be a pastor. And my call story is kind of long, so I won't share it here. But like I said, God has been in it from the very beginning. Even when I look back from where I was in that hospital room to now, it's incredible to even think about. But when I think about my calling, it just blows me away, because at first I didn't know how I would do it, because I love God and I love people, but how do I visit people? How do I preach? How do I do all these things? There were all these question marks that I just had about that. But I preached for the very first time on November 9th, 2016, and I've gotten to preach several times since then, and so it's been a real growing experience for me. And I worked at a church for 2 summers in my hometown, and during that time, I got the opportunity to do a variety of different things that pastors do. And so the last 4 years, I would say, have been really formative for me spiritually as well, because there were a lot of different things, like I said, that I didn't think I could do, but God brought people into my life who really, really spoke into that calling, and they said, I see that in you. I know you can do it. Here's all these opportunities. Try them, and I'll be with you. I'll encourage you. And, with God's help, you will do this. And it's just been really incredible to witness how God has used different challenges to show Himself, because that is the whole point, is for God to be glorified. And that's what I want most, more than anything that I could ever want, is for God to be glorified through my story and through the things that I do. One concrete example, I don't know, it's hard because there's so many, But yeah, like I said, I just got to do a lot of different things during those 2 summers. And then at my home church, I've gotten to lead worship and to preach. And so in doing those things, God has really shown me that I can do it, because every time he just meets that need, whatever it is. And sometimes it's one that I've come across multiple times and I've learned to deal with, or sometimes it's brand new. But God really deserves all the glory for who I am and where I am, because he's really provided.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Yeah, it can be hard when we think about, we get so caught up in our own limitations and our own difficulties, but just remembering that God is so much bigger, and allowing him to use you, like stepping out in faith, even though you don't know exactly how all of these things are going to work out. It's just really cool to see how God continues to provide and make things possible in that you may have not been able to see, not been able to do on your own. So super cool. What's one thing that you think people who are now living in this current COVID crisis, what's one thing that you think would be encouraging for them to know?
I think one thing that has encouraged me is that God shows up in such small things that we shouldn't underestimate the places where God works and the places where God decides to use us.
Yeah.
Like, for example, one thing that I've been really blessed with through this time is I've had a lot more time to write poetry, which is something that for me, God has really used to speak to my heart. And it's different for everyone. We all have our own hobbies, our own likes and dislikes, but that is something that for me, God has just really spoken to me and taught me as I've written about different things that have happened in the quarantine and beyond the quarantine. And so I would just say, like, don't be afraid to lean in to this time and this season, and don't be afraid to try new things, and to also lean into your passions, because I think when we give God what we have, he can use that in incredible ways. No matter how big or small we think that it is, God can just use it to grow us and to grow the kingdom. And for me, that's something that in poetry, like when I write and when I share it with people, that's always the goal, is to glorify God and to help other people.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing some of these things that you've learned and ways that you've grown through your experience. It's been really good to get to hear from you. And thank you everyone for watching this video. And I hope for you to come back again next week to continue hearing some encouraging stories in the midst of the pandemic. So thank you for watching. Bye for now.